Hey, how's it going? It's Simon from YNS Tactical, and today we're here to film a technical guide video. This is going to be the first in a series of other technical guide videos, and the main point of that would be to address some of the questions that we most commonly get from our customers. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to get this information out there and make sure you guys have a good buyer experience, I guess, or ownership experience with these airsoft guns. So the focus of today's video is primarily going to be on the APFG MCX platform. This is going to be applicable to the Rattler, which I have a cane brake front end on this, but otherwise it's a Rattler. The Spear LT, and even the Legacy MCX, the Generation 1 MCX. So what are we here to talk about today? Well, we're going to be looking at how to disassemble and reassemble your front end assembly. We get a lot of people who have mishaps when they're doing this, and they end up breaking something. And there's a few things you could probably break doing this improperly. So we're going to be taking a look at how to take this apart and putting into consideration some of the things that you have to look out for, especially if it's your first time doing this. So without further ado, some of the tools that we're going to be needing to use would be primarily a pin punch. And this one over here is not going to be the right size for what we need it for today, just for illustration purposes. So I'll be using one of these jeweler screwdrivers. These are very cheap. I get them from the dollar store. I constantly destroy them. I just replace them. They've bailed my ass out of a lot of stuff many a time. The second thing that we're going to need is, as you could probably guess, like an Allen key set or a screwdriver bit set with a hex head and a star bit. Those are the two that we're going to be needing today. If this is the first time that you're doing this, I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware of this already, but if not, this OEM and VFC happen to use quite a bit of Loctite on a lot of their threaded components. So the muzzle of this gun and the outer barrel of this gun, there's a lot of times where they have a little bit too much Loctite from the factory. And what Loctite is a commercial trade name for thread glue or thread seal. So that's intended to keep your threaded parts from unthreading itself from shock, say the recoil from one of these type of guns. So usually that would make it pretty difficult to disassemble one of these things, and you're probably going to need a heat gun to do this properly. Um, I'm going to say from my general experience, I wouldn't recommend anything but a heat gun. I've said quite a few times before that a heat gun is not expensive. It's like a $30, $40 tool off Amazon. You get them anywhere. You could probably even get them the same day delivered to your door. There's no excuse to cheap out there. You're going to cause more problems than not. Um, so, what are some of the types of damage that we've seen from not doing this properly? Well, I've seen multiple people bend or break bend their barrel assembly or break, as in snap off the chamber threads on the Hopup chamber when they're trying to remove their muzzle. And recently we had a customer who was just unaware of the disassembly process for the front end assembly of this gun, and he ended up breaking a Hopup arm as well. So, like I said prior when we started talking about this, these videos are really there to give you guys a little bit of context about how we do certain things. There's probably other ways to do this, but so far these methods have worked pretty well for us. And ultimately, it's to have a more trouble-free ownership experience. So you spend more time shooting, less time spending money on replacing things that you broke. So yeah, without further ado, let's get the front end of this gun off, and then we could start taking a look at the front assembly, the stuff on the inside. So, starting with the front end of the gun, the first thing I'm probably going to do would be to undo the front pin, takedown pin. And if you have this particular stock, you're going to have to pull that out first before you're able to do this. And you essentially want to get the front and rear takedown pin off. And for the sake of actually just making this easier, I'm just going to take the whole upper assembly. take the whole upper receiver off the lower receiver. It's always nice to stay organized as you're working, so make sure you know exactly where your components are. Alright, so right now we want to take the handguard off the gun. That's the step that I'm on. I'm going to just take the suppressor off first, because it's really only just going to get in the way at this moment. And as we see here, the front pin, the lug for the front pin is what retains this bracket in place for the front handguard. But you might be wondering, hey, if you've done this before, why is that not coming off the gun? Well, it's because of these two screws that hold the tension plates for the hop-up chamber in the gun, in the upper receiver. They actually get caught up on this lug over here for the handguard. So what you really need to do while you're doing this is back out or remove these screws as you're sliding the handguard off the gun. So these two screws over here are going to require their own type of hex head, and they're kind of loose on my gun already, and there's a specific reason for that, and has to do with retaining the handguard on and eliminating some of the wobble that goes on. So it's actually quite nice that these are kind of loose. I could just demonstrate this on video very easily. As you'll probably be seeing here, once this first screw, you want to stay organized, know where everything is. Once that's out, you could get the handguard a bit more forward, and it should be very apparent why the reasoning behind this is, because it acts like a crossbolt and gets caught on the bracket, like I was saying. So let's get this second one off here, and this one usually I do up a little bit tighter, so I'm going to use this really nifty little tool I have here, which is a very small ratchet wrench. And this thing is very invaluable for working on guns, but I don't quite remember where I got it from. And we will start to undo the second one. The reason why I'm doing this with the screw facing down is because once it clears the thread on the other side, it tends to just free spin a little bit. So it is nice to be able to have gravity aid it a little bit. Because I do not believe this whole thing is threaded all the way through, so you know, you could just be free spinning it after a while. Yep, there goes the second one. And the brackets are falling apart already. Alright, so with that, the handguard has been taken off the gun, and the two brackets have been removed as well. Over here, what is keeping the front end assembly still on the upper receiver would be this pin. And this pin is going to be something that you're going to probably likely have to punch out. So we're going to use the pin punch I was talking about, and this is going to be the proper size for that. Get ourselves a hammer, and you really just want to tap it out, but if it just comes out like this, then, you know, no need for a hammer. And the whole front end assembly just slides right out. Easy peasy. And the purpose of today's video really is just going to be talking about this assembly primarily. So, before we continue with the disassembly of the whole front end assembly, I want to give a little bit of context to people who might be doing this for the first time. When you first get these guns, very likely there's going to be a muzzle brake on the front end of it. As you can see here, I have a screw-on SRD 762 Ti SIG suppressor on here. So that's not really quite applicable. And as you can see, it is just finger tight. Like, comes right off. But when there's thread lock from the factory on the muzzle and also on the outer barrel, not so simple. If you just try to break it open with brute force, we've seen people bend the barrels, we've seen people snap the hop-up chamber threads. You could cause a ton of damage doing this, and that's no fun. Especially on a new gun, and some people have broken this gun the first day they've gotten it, work on it. So how would I handle that? I've done this already, so this is all going to come apart really easily. but I'm going to just show you guys how I would usually do this. So it's nice to have a table vise while you're doing this. It's not entirely necessary, but I think an investment like this is well worth its weight in money or gold, just because you just make your life easier. So I would clamp this down on the flattest part possible, which would probably be this part of the chamber looking at it, and this is going to depend on whatever part it is that you're working on. And this is also applicable to other things, not just the MCX front end. So once you get this clamped down on here, I see a lot of people would use their heat gun, and yes, this is a power drill, but I'm too lazy to get my heat gun. And I see a lot of people, like, they would heat up the threads of the gun, like, where they're trying to remove something off of, get it pretty dang hot, and then they would put that down and start trying to turn it or something. That's generally not going to work all that well. Like, the time it takes for you to put that down and put it somewhere safe so you don't burn something with your heat gun and then get your wrench, a lot of that glue is solidified back already. So that's kind of why a lot of people might believe a heat gun is ineffective, when no, that is the tool to do this with. So what I would recommend, and this is a trick I've learned from a long time ago working in some shops, you want to be able to get something that fits on here for you to torque it. So in this instance, I'm going to pretend that this works with this AR wrench. And you want to apply heat to all sides of the thread as you're giving it a bit of a torque. So as you're turning it and you're heating it up, the glue should just break loose very easily. And once that happens, you could probably pretty much even take the heat off of it already, and it'll really just keep going and come right off. And after the first time you do this, it becomes incredibly simple, believe it or not. Like, it doesn't really give anyone any more problems afterwards. So that's the first thing that most people have trouble with the front end regarding Loctite. The second thing I would say would be the outer barrel assembly here. And you would have to remove the gas block before you do any of this, or you could break something. So, you're going to be able to see that a little bit further down this video when we take this apart, but if you're wanting to remove the outer barrel and there's Loctite on it, you could snap the threads that it screws onto the chamber with, and that's bad. So, you might be thinking, like, well, where do I clamp onto this? It's a completely round shape. There's nothing to bite onto. You could use a pair of pliers somewhere and it could scratch up the thing, or you could use these slots that the OEM cuts in to their outer barrels. And the purpose of this is to give you a point to wrench on. So you might be thinking, oh, but what if I have a longer outer barrel on it like I do on mine, right? Well, in that case, that's where I would use something almost like these needle nose pliers. And you're able to clamp down onto the slots like this. And with that clamped down, that's when you would apply heat to this back section here and turn it. And give it a bit of torque, and it'll come loose, just like the muzzle device. Alright, so starting with the disassembly of the front end hop chamber and outer barrel assembly. Can't count how many times I've said assembly in this video already. You want to be able to take off a couple of screws first. And they're primarily going to be this one and this one on the bottom, which the purpose of them is to align and, I guess, center the gas block assembly, the mock gas block. In this case, it's really just to adjust your Hopup, which I'm sure you're aware of already if you own this gun. So there's two screws down here, which you need to undo first. And again, as I've been saying all along, you want to keep very organized as you're doing this. Have a nice open work area, and you could just lay the things down next to each other so you remember what they're for and where they go. So once these two screws are removed, the one thing that you have to take out first before you remove this gas dial would be this pin over here. The tricky thing with these MCX gas blocks is this pin is fake. It's a dummy. It's just molded in. Doesn't attach to anything. Doesn't hold anything together. And this is a what appears to be like a fake roll pin or something like that, I guess. So we're gonna first punch out this pin because that's keeping this dial inside this assembly. And as I said earlier, my pin punch is just big enough for this, but it's kind of necessary, so I'm gonna be going with something a little smaller, which is the screwdriver. And this If you have a proper size pin punch, that will be better for this. If you have a pin jig, it would be better for this, but, you know, for our purposes here right now for this demonstration, all this will have to do. So that pin has come out, and these pins are crowned, as you can see. There's one section that's crowned. You would do best to remember which way it goes forward, and you always want to insert it from the non-pin side, or the non-crown side, and knock it down on the crown side. So let's set that apart for now. So as you can see, this is kind of loose now, but it's caught up on the hop-up arm and all that inside. So now you would simply just turn the gas knob, and it should come right out. There you go. And after that, this whole assembly should come off as well. Set that aside. So this is what we're left here right now. You can pull this off too, and this is the piece that could break very easily if you don't remove the gas block assembly properly. It's a cheap replacement part, but I could think of more exciting ways to spend my own money, let's say, than replacing it. So with all that said and done, we really only have one retention. Oh, excuse me. We only have one retention screw on the bottom here now, and that is going to take its own size of hex head as well, which I believe is a 1.5 millimeter. Give it 1 or 2 turns, and it should come right off. So as I stated earlier in the video, if this is your first time taking this apart, this is the step where you're probably going to get this back onto the vise, and you're going to get the needle nose pliers on the front over here, and your barrel probably doesn't stick out if it's the first time you did this. Then you're probably going to heat gun the back over here and apply torque as as that happens. But as you can see, I've done this before, so this just comes right off. There you go, your outer barrel assembly. This piece is steel on the rattler as well, which contributes quite a bit to why these chamber threads snap, in our opinion. So we're left with this now, basically, which is our hop-up assembly. And it's really only held together by these 3 Phillips screws. So as you undo those 3, this will come right apart. Or you can just pull them out with a pair of tweezers. Alright, so with all those 3 screws taken apart, this whole assembly, it's a clamshell, should just come apart. Very simple. So as you're opening this, make sure it's face down on one side so, you know, stuff doesn't go flying. Oh, okay, it wants to come apart on this end. And there you have it. So this hop chamber is not really anything that exotic. There is a chamber face that slots on, and there is going to be 2 slots here on the side that, you know, line up with these slots over here. There's only one way you could put this in. Impossible to screw up when you're putting it back together. And as you're taking this apart, you will see it is a regular VSR, VFC type bucking with the tab cut off, or it might just not have a tab to begin with. And there is a little retaining ring. And this is the tension arm, and it swivels on this little cross pin. And this is just free floating in there. It's not glued in, it's not retained in or anything, so be very careful you don't lose this when you're taking this apart. And there you go. That is the assembly procedure for the front end assembly of a APFG MCX. And we're going to be moving on to reassembling it here very soon. All right, so we're going to start putting this back together now. And, you know, as you could probably guess, it's the same thing, but backwards. But, you know, there's a couple of things you might want to look out for. You know, as with any gas blowback inner barrel assembly and hop-up, it's very likely going to be a VSR type for a modern gun. I think that's the case for a Tokyo Marui MWS, most VFC guns. It's probably more that escapes my mind at this moment. Anywho, these barrels have a slot on the bottom to line up the bucking. And you're going to be able to see it from the back side of the bucking. This is the back side, and this is the front side. There should be a groove on the bottom here. It might be kind of difficult to show on camera. Yeah, you should be able to see it there. There's like a little groove in there, and it fits into the slot on the bottom of the barrel. So you really just poke this thing in here, turn it a couple of times, and you should feel it locking down, and you're good to go. There's always a cut on the barrel over here, and that's where the bucking will sit. So this is pretty much installed the way it should be already. With these type of VFC guns, a lot of times they use a retaining ring to kind of like line everything up. I don't think it actually holds everything in there, like keeps it down like that. But you know, we generally don't really see too much of a problem when it comes to consistency with these guns, so it's probably not an issue. So you would slip this ring back on first, and as you can see here, there's a cutout on the top of the ring, and that is where your tension arm is going to go. So you definitely want to line that up roughly with the top of your barrel, and it should be very easy to align. Like it's not something you really got to eyeball or anything that much. There's grooves on the side over here and grooves on the barrel, and they will correlate to, say, this tab over here on the inside surface. So let's see if I can demonstrate here. Yeah, there's a little tab here, which lines up with this part of the barrel, I believe. Oh no, it should be this part actually. And there's a groove over here, which lines up with the tab on the ring over here like this. So you simply just slide this in here, and you should feel both of them just lock in when they're in the right position. And that's it. So, you know, you might need to finesse this a little bit to get the arm in there first. And this is actually one of the more difficult parts of doing this, I would say. Oddly. And it might be kind of difficult to do with it in there, so you might even want to do it like this, where you have the whole thing kind of lined up already before you put it all in here. Yeah, and again, you see it clicking in, and then you simply put that cross pin down on here, and depress down a couple of times to make sure that it's working. There's a movement here, because if it doesn't move, then your hop doesn't work. And as with the chamber face, you want to slot this in, and you should hear the groove pop in as well. And that's pretty much it already. You pretty much got all the components lined in, and they're ready to go. Want to get the second half of this and just close it up. And you know, you might have this popping up a little bit where it's getting in the way of it closing. You might just want to give it, coax it a little with a screwdriver of some sort. And as we can see here, it's not really quite closing. So my guess is the cross pin for the hop tension arm is not quite seating. There we go. No. So you should have a little patience when you're doing this, as you're seeing right now. Some of the stuff just wasn't lined up properly, and therefore it doesn't close. But once it does, everything seats perfectly. So a good way to tell that this is essentially built correctly before you put the screws back on would be to grab this piece, slide it in here under the hop arm, and as you hold it up to a light of some sort where you could see through the barrel, just push it in, and you should see the nub depressing down, up and down, and that's when you know that you've done it properly. Yep, there you go. And this is a really good way to check if your barrel's lined too, honestly, because you're going to be able to see if it's crooked or not lined up properly. All right, so the next step here would be to put the free screws back in. And you should see three different grooves on this side, which happens to be the left side of the hop-up chamber. Larger grooves, let's say, and they're larger for a reason, to clear the heads of the screws. So you really just want to pop these back in there and tighten them. Nothing really all that crazy. You do not need to tighten these extremely tightly. They only need to go on roughly finger tight for the most part. but it doesn't hurt to give it a little bit of tension to make sure they don't come loose over time as well. And I think the most important part here is to make sure you don't strip a thread, because this chamber is probably made of Zalmac, so pot metal. And, you know, it's just very prone to these kind of things. So I'm going to give it a little bit of tension here. Being very careful not to strip the screw head or the threads itself. And the Hopup assembly itself is pretty much put back together already. And this is when you want to get the outer barrel back on. And once you get it on here, you just screw it back on. And it should stop on its own in the position that it needs to sit at. Give it a little bit of, tighten it a little, hand tight's fine. And there is the small little screw here, grub screw, that is used to retain the thing on, I guess. It's probably just for anti-shock, so your recoil doesn't make your outer barrel start spinning. It's a very small screw, so you want to be careful when you're tightening this, that you don't obliterate it. It doesn't need to be that tight, from my experience. Okay, once that is back onto the gun, you want to insert this piece inside, and you want to have it scrape along the bottom edge to catch the hop-up arm along the bottom side to make sure it works. Again, it's very simple to make sure you did this correctly. If you look in here and you push and pull this thing back out, you should see your hop-up nub moving up and down and, you know, doing what it should, right? So once this is in there, you want to push it back all the way. And that's when you start to slide the gas block on. And as you're doing that, this piece should sleeve over it like that. Once you're at this step, here's where is something that you might want to pay attention to. If you can see these two grooves on the bottom here, you're going to see some markings on here, and that's likely where your screws have been sitting this entire time. And they need to rest between the middle of these two grooves, like in the middle of these two grooves. So once you insert this in here and, you know, make sure it's lined up with the thing on top, you might want to grab your screwdriver with the right head, which is this one. And you might want to have one of these inserted first as you peek down the second hole to make sure it's lined up right. There you go. Then you just tighten this, and you tighten the other one. These also don't need to be extremely tight, by the way. So I would finger tight them, and then I would just give it a little bit of torque to torque them down a little, just so this whole gas box assembly doesn't wiggle around. And I mean, that is kind of important in this sense, because this whole thing is basically what's keeping tension on your hop-up, and if this is jiggling and loose, then I can't imagine you would have very consistent hop-up performance when you're shooting the gun. So the last step for the reassembly here would be to insert back the mock gas plug. There's really only one thing to look out for here, which is, as you can see, there's a groove over here, and that's what this crown pin is going to sit between to retain this thing in there. So what you really want to do with this part is start screwing it in first, and as it roughly gets to the right spot, you could look into this hole, and you're probably going to be able to see the groove in there when it's sitting at the right position. And it's very important that you do this, you get it at the right distance, because it could cause damage to the plug, the fake mock plug itself, if this isn't sitting in the right spot. And if you've done this a couple of times and the hole is kind of worn in a bit already, let's say, then this pin should just like slot right in like that. See, I didn't even need to punch it in; it just went right in on its own. And that is pretty much it when it comes to putting back together a APFG MCX hop-up. I would test everything first to make sure it's all working, make sure you get, like, you know, adjustment range on this thing. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. Yep. So yeah, that's essentially it. I'm not going to cover putting this back into the gun, because I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. Um, I would say the one thing that you might want to look out for when you're putting this back into the gun, and this is a known problem for these type of guns already, is that you don't over-tension these two screws over here. Because if you do that, it can end up bending this bracket and causing some damage. So that is something that you might want to look out for. So, again, that concludes our first YNS technical video. I hope you guys found this useful and enjoyed it. We're going to be covering more topics of some common problems that, just might need a little bit of context as it pertains to keeping some of these VFC system guns running, so you spend more time shooting. I want to thank you guys for joining us on this one. Thank you to anyone who watched it, and we'll catch you in the next YNS technical video. Assembly.